Let me take you back to, a few years ago, when I first realized I had been played. Yup, played. Now, at the time, I thought I knew what I was doing. I was doing what everyone tells you, right? Save, avoid debt, put your money in the bank for a rainy day. All that nonsense. Then I met this guy. Let's call him Frank. Now Frank, he was different. He wasn't some slick-talking guru. No, Frank was more like the guy who walks into a room looking like he just rolled out of bed, but is sitting on a mountain of cash. I'm not exaggerating here. So I'm talking to Frank one day, and I ask, Frank, what's the deal? How'd you get all these properties? How'd you get so loaded? And he looks at me, deadpan, and says, debt. Now I'm thinking, what? Did this guy just say debt? Is he out of his mind? Because, you know how we're raised, debt is supposed to be a bad thing, right? Like, you should pay everything off as fast as possible, or you're doomed to financial ruin. So I look at Frank and I go, hold up, debt? You mean like mortgages and loans? Isn't that risky? And Frank just laughs. Seriously, laughs. He says, no, debt is only risky if you don't know how to use it. I love debt. He's practically giggling, and at this point, I'm scratching my head. What is this guy talking about? Then Frank starts breaking it down for me in the simplest terms possible. He says, you know inflation, right? Yeah, duh. I'm thinking, we all know inflation, prices go up, your money buys less. He goes, that's exactly why I love debt. I take out these long-term, fixed-rate loans on properties, and as inflation rises, the real value of my debt shrinks. Now let me paint the picture for you. Imagine Frank takes out a loan for $500,000 at a fixed interest rate, say 4%. Over time, inflation kicks in at, 3%, 4%, maybe 5% per year? Now the money Frank owes stays the same on paper, right? But in real terms, it's worth less and less. By year 10, that $500,000 loan is starting to feel like pocket change, but his property, oh man, it's worth way more than that now. Way more. So while everyone else is freaking out about rising prices, Frank's sitting there, watching the value of his assets soar, while his debt just shrinks. This hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, wait, you mean you're actually making money off inflation? Frank just smiles, takes a sip of his coffee, and goes, yep, every time inflation goes up, my debt gets smaller. Boom. Mind blown. I'll be honest, at that moment, I was mad. Mad, because I had spent years thinking debt was the enemy. Meanwhile, guys like Frank, they're using it as a tool to build wealth. That's when I realized the game's rigged, but not in the way I thought. If you know the rules, you can actually turn debt into your greatest asset. Now, what did I do with this newfound knowledge? Well, I went and started locking in fixed-rate loans on investment properties. And let me tell you, once you get that first property and inflation starts doing its thing, you start feeling a little bit like Frank. The mortgage payment stays the same, but the rent you're charging, that's going up, baby. And every year, that loan feels lighter and lighter while the cash flow gets stronger. So what's the lesson here? Debt isn't the enemy. It's the tool that can set you free if you know how to use it. Get yourself a fixed-rate loan, sit back, and let inflation do its dirty work for you. It's like having the wind at your back while everyone else is fighting against it. Oh, and if you're liking this so far, maybe hit that little thumbs up button. Just saying, there's more where this came from. But hey, Frank didn't stop there. Nope, the guy had more tricks up his sleeve. Next thing he hits me with is this thing called a 1031 exchange. Now, I'd never heard of this before, so when he said it, I was like, what's that? Some kind of tax code voodoo? Frank just chuckles and goes, it's not voodoo. It's the government's gift to real estate investors. So of course I lean in because, gift from the government? You've got my attention. Frank explains, a 1031 exchange lets you sell a property, take all the profit, and instead of paying capital gains tax, which by the way is usually like 20% or more, you roll that profit into buying a new property. No taxes. Zilch. I'm like, hold up, Frank. You're telling me you can sell a property, make a boatload of cash, and not pay any taxes on the gains if you just buy another property? He nods, totally calm, and says, yep, as long as you follow the rules. buy another property of equal or greater value, and do it within a certain time frame. You can keep doing it forever. Now this blew my mind. I mean, the average person buys a house, sells it, and gets clobbered by the tax man. Meanwhile, Frank and the other wealthy folks are just rolling from one property to the next, building bigger portfolios, all tax-free. The government doesn't see a penny of their capital gains. Let me break it down for you in a real-life example, because this is what I did after learning from Frank. I had this little rental property, bought it for about $200,000. After a few years, it appreciated to $300,000. Now, most people would sell it, pocket the $100,000 profit, and then get hit with a capital gains tax of about, what, $20,000? Not me. I did exactly what Frank told me. I used a 1031 exchange, sold that property, took the $100,000 profit, and rolled it into a bigger investment, all while paying zero in taxes. Zero. The best part? You can keep doing this over and over, and then, when you eventually kick the bucket, sorry to get morbid here, your kids inherit the property at its new, stepped-up value. So they don't pay taxes on all your gains either. It's like Frank said, it's the gift that keeps on giving. Now, what should you be doing? Easy. If you own a property and it's appreciated in value, don't just sell it and get hit with that huge tax bill. Set up a 1031 exchange and roll those gains into a bigger property. You're building wealth tax-free while everyone else is leaving money on the table. It's the real estate version of the cheat code. If this is starting to make sense and you've got questions, drop a comment. I mean, this stuff sounds wild. I get it, but it's real, and I love talking about it. So go ahead and ask away. Now, let me tell you about this other thing Frank schooled me on. Depreciation. And trust me, this is where the rich start playing with monopoly money. And I'm not kidding. If you thought the 1031 exchange was wild, wait until you hear this. So I'm sitting there with Frank again, and he's like, you know, most people think real estate is only about cash flow and appreciation, right? You buy a property, the value goes up, you collect rent, and you're golden. I'm nodding along like, yeah, that's the game, right? And Frank just shakes his head, laughs again, and says, nope, there's a whole other layer you're missing, my friend. So I ask him, what are you talking about? What am I missing? And he hits me with this, depreciation. Now at first I'm thinking, depreciation? Isn't that when things lose value? And Frank just smirks and goes, exactly, but here's the catch. The IRS lets you pretend your property is losing value, even when it's not. Let me explain that. So you buy a rental property for, let's say, $300,000. The government allows you to depreciate that property over 27.5 years for tax purposes. What does that mean? Well, it means you get to claim about $10,900 per year as a paper loss. On paper, it looks like your property is wearing out, like the walls are crumbling, the pipes are rusting, the roof is caving in, but in reality, the property is probably going up in value. And yet, you're getting to write off that $10,900 against your income every single year. Now, this is where it gets hilarious. On paper, it might look like you're losing money because of this depreciation deduction, but in real life, you're raking it in. You've got tenants paying rent, the property's value is appreciating, and yet the IRS is letting you tell them, oh no, my property is wearing out. I'm losing value here. And they go, yeah, sure, we believe you. Here's your tax break. It's nuts. And you can bet I took this to heart. Right after Frank explained this to me, I started applying depreciation on all my rental properties. And let me tell you, it's a game changer. One year, I had a property that was cash flowing like crazy, but after depreciation, my taxable income was zero. Zero. The property's making me money, but I'm not paying taxes on it. It's like a legal loophole that the rich have been using forever. Now, there's a small catch, and Frank warned me about this. When you sell the property, the IRS might want you to recapture some of that depreciation, meaning you might owe some taxes. But, and this is a big but, if you're using the 1031 exchange trick I mentioned earlier, you can roll that property into another one and keep deferring those taxes forever. It's like playing a never-ending game of kick the can, and the IRS just watches as you build more and more wealth. Now, listen closely, because this is what you need to do. If you own a rental property, or even just one property, you need to be using depreciation. Don't skip this. Find a tax advisor who knows their stuff and get this deduction working for you. You can be collecting rent, making cash flow, and yet on paper, it looks like you're not making much at all. That's how the rich play it. And it's how you should too. And if you're liking this so far, maybe hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next upload. We're going to keep diving into these little known tricks. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming up. Okay, let's move on to something a little more sneaky. Buying off-market properties. Now, this is where things get really fun. Frank taught me about this too. He's like, you know how most people are out there scouring Zillow or Realtor.com, competing with everyone else to buy properties? And I nod because, yeah, that's what I used to do. And then Frank hits me with, that's not how the big players do it. They're buying properties before they ever hit the market. At this point, I'm intrigued. I'm like, wait, how do they do that? Is this some underground real estate mafia thing? I was only half joking. And Frank just shakes his head and goes, no, it's all about networking and knowing the right people. The rich are scooping up off-market deals through private connections, wholesalers, agents, developers, before the average person even knows the property's for sale. So he explains how wealthy investors have these relationships with people who specialize in finding distressed properties, foreclosures, or owners who need to sell fast. And because these deals are done behind closed doors, they get the properties for way below market value. By the time you or I see that property on Zillow, the good deals are long gone. I remember Frank telling me, you've got to get into these networks if you want to play the game like the big dogs. Go to real estate meetups, talk to wholesalers, build relationships with agents who have the inside track on deals before they hit the market. And so that's exactly what I did. I started attending every real estate event I could find, shaking hands, making connections, and eventually I found myself in on some off-market deals. The first one, I bought a duplex at a 20% discount because I found out about it before anyone else. The best part about buying off-market, you're not dealing with bidding wars or overpaying. You get the property at a discount and your returns are higher right from the start. It's like getting a head start in a race while everyone else is still tying their shoes. So if you want to start getting better deals in real estate, get yourself into those off-market networks. Find local wholesalers, go to investment clubs, and build relationships with agents who know how to find deals before they hit the MLS. This is how the wealthy are getting ahead. And now you can too. And hey, if you've got any questions about off-market deals or want more tips, drop them in the comments. I love hearing from you guys, and I'm here to help you crack the code, one deal at a time. All right, so let's talk about zoning and insider information. This is where the biggest profits are hiding and the real big dogs play. I remember when Frank first told me about this, I thought, wait, are we talking about something sketchy here? Because come on, getting the inside scoop before anyone else even knows what's happening. It kind of sounds like we're entering shady territory, right? But no, this is totally legit. And it's how the wealthiest investors make their biggest gains. So Frank goes, nah, it's not illegal. This is all about being connected and paying attention. Now, this was back when a new highway was being planned in my city. It was going to open up all this new land for development, and properties along the route were set to skyrocket in value. Frank tells me, you think all those rich folks are waiting for the news to hit the papers? Please. They already bought up the land years ago. And he was right. I did some digging. And sure enough, properties that were nothing more than dirt and weeds a few years earlier were suddenly worth millions. Why? Because these investors had the inside scoop. They knew the highway was coming long before anyone else did. And how did they know? They were paying attention to local government meetings. They had connections with city planners. And they were watching zoning changes like hawks. So Frank gives me this golden advice. He says, if you want to get ahead, you need to start attending city council meetings. Watch what's getting reasoned. Follow the infrastructure bills being proposed. Basically, you need to know where the city's putting in new roads, schools, or transit hubs, because those developments are like gold mines for real estate investors. I'll give you a personal example. After learning this from Frank, I started paying attention to local developments in my area. Sure enough, I found out that a new public transportation line was being planned, and it was going to run right through a neighborhood that was, let's just say, not exactly the best part of town. But guess what? I bought a couple of rental properties in that neighborhood before the news went public. Fast forward a few years, that area transformed into a hotbed for young professionals because of the new transit line, and my property values, they doubled just like that. It wasn't magic. It was knowing where to look and getting ahead of the game before everyone else jumped in. The rich have been doing this forever, and it's something you can do too. You just have to pay attention. Most people are too busy looking at properties that are already hot. But the real money, it's in buying where the future is being built, not where it's already built. So here's what you should be doing. Start following your local government's planning and zoning meetings. Seriously, I know it sounds boring, but it's a gold mine for information. You'll get the inside track on which areas are going to blow up in value, and if you can get in early, you'll be sitting on a profit bomb that'll explode in a few years. And hey, if you're still with me and getting something out of this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, yeah? We've still got a lot more to cover, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let me tell you about something that makes me a little angry, to be honest. We've all seen it, and it drives me nuts. The way the big money investors have cornered the rental market. This is another one of those insider moves that no one talks about. But it's crushing the little guy, and I've seen it happen up close. So picture this. I've got a buddy. Let's call him Dave. Now, Dave's been trying to get into real estate for years, and he's finally saved up enough to buy his first rental property. He's scouring the market, looking for a good deal. And he keeps getting outbid. Every time he finds a property, bam, some big investment firm swoops in and buys it up. Cash offer. He's frustrated, and I'm frustrated for him. It's like, what the heck is going on? Well, here's what's going on. Big investment firms are buying up single-family homes in bulk. They're hoarding properties, turning them into rentals, and then jacking up rents. These firms don't care about families trying to buy a first home. Nope. They're all about monopolizing the rental market. They're artificially limiting supply, and because they're sitting on so many properties, they can crank up the rents because, well, they control the market. It's basically price gouging, just with housing instead of gas or food. And I saw this firsthand in a neighborhood I was watching. Houses were going for $200,000 one year, and by the next year, you couldn't touch one for less than $300,000. All because these big firms had moved in and started snapping up properties. And what about the renters? Oh, they were getting squeezed hard. Rents shot up by 20–30%. The whole thing made me sick. But here's where we can flip the script. What I learned is that while these big firms are out there scooping up single-family homes, they're often overlooking small multi-family properties, like duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. They're too small for the big fish to care about, but for regular folks, they're the perfect entry point. So what should you do if you're like Dave, trying to break into real estate but getting outbid? Stop competing for single-family homes and start looking for small multi-family properties. This is where you can get in, start generating rental income, and here's the best part, house hack. Live in one unit, rent out the others, and let your tenants pay your mortgage. You're building equity, cash flowing, and you're not fighting against the big investment firms because they're not looking at these smaller properties. Trust me, I've done this myself, and it's a total game changer. You get to live for almost nothing while your tenants are paying off your loan. And when the market appreciates, boom, you're sitting on a property that's worth way more than what you paid for it. So yeah, the big firms might be gobbling up single-family homes, but don't let that stop you. There's always a way to beat the system, and small multi-family properties are your secret weapon. Now, before we wrap things up, let me give you one last sneaky tip the rich love, but hardly anyone talks about. It's called cost segregation. Sounds like a boring accounting term, right? Trust me, this one's worth its weight in gold. And I had no idea about this until, once again, Frank came along and casually mentioned it over coffee, like it was common knowledge. So I'm sitting there with Frank, and he's going on about his new property, and he says, yeah, I'm doing a cost segregation study on it to speed up the depreciation. I blinked and was like, wait, hold on, what now? Cost segregation? What is that? Frank gives me that look, the one he always gives me when I'm missing something really obvious. Like, I should have been born knowing this stuff. And he goes, let me break it down for you. Normally, you can depreciate a rental property over 27.5 years, right? But with cost segregation, you can break the property down into its components, things like the plumbing, electrical systems, flooring, even the appliances, and depreciate those things faster. Now, at this point, I'm kind of confused, but intrigued. I'm like, faster? How much faster? And Frank's eyes light up. He loves this stuff. He says, certain parts of the property can be depreciated over 5, 7, or 15 years instead of 27.5. So you get massive deductions up front, which means you're paying way less in taxes in the early years. And now my head is spinning. Wait. So you're telling me you can take a property and speed up the tax benefits? Exactly. It's like taking the tax deduction you normally spread out over 27 years and turbocharging it. Frank tells me, you're getting a big chunk of that depreciation in the first few years, which is when you need it most. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I went out and got a cost segregation study done on one of my properties. And let me tell you, the results were insane. In that first year alone, I was able to write off tens of thousands more than I would have with regular depreciation. Tens of thousands. And here's the kicker. You don't have to be a big-time player to use this. You can do it on any property that generates rental income. All you need is a good cost segregation specialist. And boom, you're knocking thousands off your taxable income. So here's what you need to do. If you own a rental property, or you're planning to buy one, get a cost segregation study done. I know it sounds technical, but the amount of money you'll save on taxes is huge. You can basically take your depreciation and supercharge it, freeing up more cash for other investments, or just keeping more money in your pocket. Trust me, the rich have been doing this for years, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. Now you can too. All right, if this is starting to open your eyes to how much of a game real estate really is, and you're thinking, hey, this guy Frank, he's onto something, well, you're right. Frank wasn't just smart. He was playing the system, while the rest of us were just trying to keep up. And I'll tell you, once you start seeing how all these strategies fit together, it's like a puzzle where each piece makes you more money. Now, I want to wrap this up with one last story. One that's a bit personal, but it really drove home how networking is one of the most powerful tools in real estate. And I'll never forget the time it saved me from what could have been a disaster. So a few years back, I had my eye on a property. Good location, decent price, nothing too flashy, but I knew it had potential. But there was one problem. I had already maxed out my financing options. I couldn't get another loan, and I didn't have the cash to close the deal. I was stuck. It was one of those moments where you're staring at your phone, looking at your bank account, and thinking, man, why didn't I start saving earlier? Hey, we've all been there, right? Anyway, I was about to throw in the towel when I remembered something Frank told me. He always said, real estate is a team sport. If you think you're going to do everything alone, you're missing the point. Leverage your network. And boy, was he right. So what did I do? I reached out to a couple of people I had met at a local real estate meetup group. They were investors, and one of them, I'll call him Tom, had mentioned he was looking for opportunities but didn't have the time to manage them himself. So I shot him a message, explained the situation, and said, look, I've got this great deal, but I'm short on financing. You interested in going in together? Tom didn't even hesitate. He looked at the numbers, and a week later, we had a partnership in place. He put up the cash, I managed the property, and we split the profits. I didn't just save the deal. I made more than I would have if I'd gone solo. That's when it hit me. Real estate isn't just about the properties. It's about the people you meet along the way. Your network can be the difference between missing out on a deal or turning a small opportunity into a huge win. So here's my final piece of advice. Get out there and network. I don't care if you're introverted, extroverted, or somewhere in between. Find a local real estate group, go to those meetups, shake some hands, grab a coffee with other investors, Trust me. You never know when that next deal is going to come from a relationship you built today.